Three, two. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Universe channel, where we're having an ongoing conversation with Dr. James Stalker. As you know, Dr. Stalker is an entrepreneur, inventor, scientist, and today Dr. Stalker is going to continue discussing the fundamentals that are the underpinnings of the Enterprise Universe. And maybe, Dr. Stalker, you could give us a quick recap about what the purpose of the enterprise universe is, and what are why and what are these fundamentals that are so important to success.
Thank you, Eamon. Appreciate it. The introduction is great. So, we talked about the fundamentals that I want the enterprise universe to, pursue in its own goals. And the enterprise universe has a special purpose, and that purpose is spreading goodness through innovation. But just having a purpose is not going to be enough. You got to have other building blocks. And I talked about 8 other fundamental blocks of framework for success. So we talked about actually, asking me when you asked me about why they're fundamental. So I have to give you kind of an analogy. It would really kind of encapsulate what we're talking about. Let's say you live in the woods, and you have a nice house, and you have a running creek in front of your house, and you are crossing that creek every day to work, to go into town. But you don't want to get wet every day, or you don't want to get dirty, obviously. So you put some stepping stones to cross that creek. So think of these 9 blocks as those stepping stones. Okay. So they are independent. Obviously, you can count them, they're separate, but they're enabling you to achieve a particular goal of crossing that creek. So that's really what I mean by building blocks of these 9 entrepreneurship fundamentals. And we touched on up to a recipe yesterday. So the 5th one is know thyself. But one other thing that you really kind of kept going back, Em, and I want to kind of touch on that is you seem to kind of think that the entrepreneur is lost in the business itself. Yes. You have done that many times. So I want to
I've gotten lost. I get confused between me and the business, if you will.
Yeah. So
you bring me. You're always bringing me back to me, and the fundamentals being me, and then basically the business. While I tend to be applying the fundamentals to the business rather than the person. So, and there tends to be, and while they can be applied to the business, where you're really coming from, I've been learning is that they're really for the person, and then the person can apply them in achieving success. And I think that's what you were getting at anyway.
Yeah. So what happens is this, Eamon, when you look at large businesses, obviously the original founders are no longer there, right? Their vision, whatever purpose they had, they were supposed to be passing down to, whoever the successors were. But let's just say that hasn't happened. Or it's possible that they didn't really have a firm understanding of what those building blocks were. That's also possible. But in any successful business, you need to have a set of these fundamentals clearly defined for yourself and for your successors for that success. So we talked about recipe too. My recipe, 50% technology, 30% business, and 20% financial resources. That's a successful recipe for my business, for the Enterprise Universe member businesses. That's not necessarily the case for anyone else. So if you randomly pick a business and you put them in 3 buckets, you have to ask if that's the right recipe for success.
One of the things that I think, this is a question really. We got this situation where we got these stock companies where the assumption is that the shareholders of the capital are the most important stakeholders. And I wonder if in your vision of the enterprise universe, are you to some extent advocating that we move beyond the concept of like capital based stock companies and move more to where the value is in the innovator, and the value is in the like, as you said yesterday, the recipe you mentioned yesterday were all around people, and everything you've discussed is around the people, and you've really kind of, so I wonder, is to some extent what you're saying, it feels like it may be a human, but moving back to a human centric sense of organizing business, and moving away a bit from the detached, you know, asset maximizing version of capitalism that we're kind of seeing today. I know you're not anti-capitalist per se, but it may be that we're out of whack a bit with being human centric enough. Is that true?
It is true. As a matter of fact, we will spend another session on the capitalism and my take on it. But the way it works within the enterprise universe, because it focuses on the people that are developing it, I have ideas about creating equity pools for individuals that belong in different categories. And the more they contribute to it, the more benefit they get from those equity pools. So it's kind of a novel idea, but it may have a little bit of a difficult thing for us to do, but we could do that.
And I think, you know, human participation versus one-time capital injection is something to be thought about, because that would allow every generation to basically become part. And then when you die, you know, it's not, you're not participating anymore, versus kind of that. I'm just wondering if that's a part of the vision to kind of.
It is, as a matter of fact, Eamon, I would keep the capital activity outside of the enterprise universe. Mm-hmm. The initial infusion is going to come from that, but any successful business, Eamon, should not rely on nothing more than revenue. Revenue is really the lifeblood of any business, but initially you need capital, and that capital is produced or infused from this capital group that would be separate from this entire member businesses. So hoping that, you know, within 5 years or so, all of the member businesses, we already have 2 of them, they will be self-reliant, producing their own revenue. So that's really the idea.
Right, great. So maybe we should get on to the next fundamental then, Dr. Stalker. Now that we've done the quick recap, where are we now in terms of our fundamentals journey?
It's really some of I mean, it's another major fundamental compared to you know, purpose. So I call this know thyself, knowing yourself. Mm-hmm. So everything that I'm saying, Eamon, really came from my own experiment with business world. You know, as an entrepreneur since 2002. I was looking at, you know, what is important, what's not important, why am I not doing well, why is somebody else doing well, what they could do better, and so forth. So it really occurred to me that this has got to be a major fundamental in an entrepreneur's tool set, simply because the more you know about yourself, the more your purpose becomes clear to you. And once you do that, as we have already showcased so far, your vision gets set properly, and you choose the right pathways, and your recipe gets also well refined for success. That's why knowing yourself is so important. And so I will tell you this, you know, when I was, as I mentioned, when I was a young man, I was highly mathematical. So my mind was thinking about really complex problems, and I thought people were just a waste of my time, simply because I didn't have the time for them, because they could not really follow logic and, you know, things like that. So what I really realized after becoming an entrepreneur, maybe several years into it, I realized, why am I doing all this? The technology and this and that, it's really for people. So I have to really understand them at a very close, intimate level. And that's a realization I have had about myself. That means knowing myself. So we all think, you know, we're confident in our ability to say, we know what we're doing, we know ourselves. But my experience so far, Eamon, we really don't have a whole lot of understanding about ourselves, and there's a whole lot more that we could do. And I call that confusion simply because, on a philosophical level, not on a psychiatric or psychological level, I'm talking about philosophically speaking. Remember what I told you about the delta between the objective reality and your subjective understanding of that reality. So let's take an analogy to understand that. So we know that the sun rises in the east, kind of like an accepted reality everybody knows about. But there might not be some people that don't have that understanding. They may not even be thinking about in the sun in the first place, what it does to the system and all of that. So your understanding of that fact and the established fact, there is a delta between the two. And that's what I call confusion. And the deeper you are to the abyss, and the closer you are to the abyss, the deeper is your confusion. So I'm only giving you one example here, but it goes to any type of physical understanding, chemical understanding, or psychological understanding, you name it, you always have that delta. So let's face that every individual, including entrepreneurs, no exception, they are confused about a lot of things. And that's why knowing yourself becomes such an important piece, especially when your products and when your services affect your customers. If you don't know yourself and your purpose gets kind of smashed all over the place, and you are not able to clearly define your vision, and your pathways are all over the place too, and the recipe, obviously, it has no value. So that's why it's important for people to know themselves. And my anecdotal in a story, I have many like that. Everybody has to understand that they have a whole lot more to understand about themselves. So I would say, then what exactly happens when you're confused, right? I think I want to talk about that. Let's say you're confused about some things. We don't know what objective reality we're going to base this discussion on. But when you are, then you may be mean, you may be bigoted, you could be an authoritarian, you could be a dictator, you could be intolerant. These are some of the symptoms of being confused, because you don't know exactly why you're confused about, why you're angry about something. It only points to the fact that you don't understand something, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really what confusion means. And unfogging that confusion really helps you come up with a better purpose, and then the rest of the blocks that we're talking about.
I think underpinning a lot of when you are speaking those words, the thought that jumped into my mind was fear, because people, like, in other words, that when you're confused, you're kind of fearful, and you're trying to project yourself on things. You're trying to, so I wonder the degree to which it actually makes things worse. That fear, if you're fearful, you're confused. If you're confused, it creates fear. And then I wonder the degree to which it's very hard to deal with confused people, because by trying to reduce the confusion, you initially may make them more confused, because they have to confront the fact that they're actually quite confused. I know that sounds like, but like, it's almost like, if I don't know I'm confused, and now suddenly you say, well, the root cause of your problem there, mate, is I think you're a bit confused. That it may be difficult to get to the point. I'm just saying, how do you get to the point of engaging with someone like myself who says, oh, look, James, I'm good, man. I got it all sorted out. Okay. I ain't confused. And then let's say you convince me, for example, COVID-19. And then I go, I don't know what's going on there. I am confused. Suddenly I'm awash in fear and anxiety, and I'm stressed out. How the hell do you deal with me then? How the hell are you going to deal with like, I'm just saying, if I'm a typical confused person, how are you going to deal with that?
Well, that's all good, Eamon. So one thing that we could refine the point, put a finer point on, is in the context of an entrepreneur, right? So they have talents and hard work, and they want to do something for themselves. We know that, but they're confused about how far their talents and hard work could go above and beyond what they need. And that confusion is really a significant issue for entrepreneurs, simply because, we talk about selfish innovation. They don't want to give it to anyone
Yeah.
else. They're all thinking about themselves. So there is some confusion there as far as how much they need, how much talent they have, and the hard work they put
Right.
in
And
to
what
bring
I'm
the forward.
capable of. And
Yes.
there's also confusion about um, always being worried about. I think I personally have a lot of issues with. At least it comes up in is other people's perceptions of me. Do you know? In other words, you know, so that can be a challenge too, because you're more worried about managing the perceptions than you are about actually being in the moment and actually dealing with the reality of the situation. I certainly have had challenges with that.
I do agree, and my only recommendation there, Eamon, you cannot satisfy everyone. They have all kinds of perceptions about you, but if you are true to yourself and you have the strong desire to better yourself, I think everything else becomes secondary. You are able to unfog yourself. Of course, if you are not, you're closed-minded, the perceptions are going to become bigger and louder, and then you essentially have the fear or any of that that's going to rule your world. You don't want to let that happen.
So now let's just go on the assumption I'm one of these. Let's say I'm in the enterprise universe. I'm somewhat confused, right? And you say know thyself, right? I go, what the hell? What is this? How the like where do I go with this? Like what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be meditating? Like what are you saying here? What should I do to know myself? And
Okay.
what does that even? How do I as one of your the folks in the enterprise unit, where do I go from here?
Well, okay. So one of the things that before I get to that, let's talk about what caused these tendencies in human beings, and I think we need to talk about that. Some of the things I'm saying here, by any stretch, they are not an exhaustive list, but you have upbringing, circumstances, experiences, and lack of independent thinking, which is a big one, and also mind training. You're not able to train your mind if you let it go everywhere. These are some of the facets as to why anyone would get confused about things. So, what to do about unfogging? Like say, Eamon, he has confusion about certain things. What we have to do is the first thing to do, Eamon, is that you have the desire to better yourself. So you have to say, James, I know what I'm confused about, and maybe not necessarily I know what I'm confused about, but I have the desire to get better. Okay, that's a good starting point. So I think one of the other fundamentals I have, Eamon, is learning. Learning is the only way to unfog yourself without learning. So what I want to do within the enterprise universe specifically is I'm not going to have prescriptive seminars and workshops, but there are various ways people get exposed to understanding their own being, and yoga being one of them. I mean, meditation, yes, if that helps you, but you really have to develop the desire to you
And
know
I'll give you an
unfog yourself.
example. I'll give you an example from my life. Is my mother used to always say, "You're just like your father." This kind of kind of thing. And then suddenly you wake up one day and like my father's been gone now for a while, and you say, "Yes, God damn it, I'm just like my father." And then I'm a little bit confused, right? I'm a little bit confused because how much of me is actually just me having, taken things from my father, right? And now I live them. You know what I'm saying? How much of that, and how much of that is fine. There's no problem with it. He was a good guy. I've no problem with that in the sense that a lot of but there's some not so good. How can I take the good and maybe decide that, some of the things that because every intergenerationally there's good, and then there's some baggage maybe that's generational that we want to leave behind, and then it's kind of like so it gets I get kind of like shit. It's like knowing yourself is a big deal, and it's a very personal thing, and it seems like I'm not sure quite, like, kind of like, it seems like a big job, man. And I was just I'm just trying to get to advocating for. Are you advocating that I just be conscious of the fact that there is a necessity to look at yourself and spend the time to be conscious about myself, and that there's many ways to do that, but grounding yourself in a realistic view of yourself is key, not to be kind of deluded? Is that kind of what you're advising me to do?
Well, I think you're really kind of pushing the boundary outside of the entrepreneurship,
Okay,
though.
okay,
Okay,
sorry.
so I want to bring it back to
Okay, sorry.
just the enterprise universe. I mean, in your personal life,
Yeah.
you have lots of things that you would have to put your mind to and better yourself. But I will bring the focus back to the enterprise universe.
Yeah.
The enterprise universe has a specific purpose. So as a person within that bubble, you have certain responsibilities. There are some expectations of you.
Okay.
So let's take an example. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we are we do not believe in racial inequality. Let's just say that everybody's equal under this umbrella. And if you have a tendency, let's say, certain uh, race may not be up to it, and so forth. I'm not saying that. If that's a recognition that the enterprise universe understands and you understand with it, and then you actually make the decision to
Okay.
the desire to really go for it, then the enterprise universe, of course, as the umbrella company, will have to give you all the tools you need. Just recognizing that there is an issue with Amen is not enough. We
Okay.
have to go beyond that and give you all the tools for you to get better.
Okay, so I think if I replay what you're saying, and I think I've misinterpreted it a little bit, which is okay because maybe there's some other people that weren't getting it either. Um, is that it's more about knowing oneself in a little bit of a practical sense of, back to your analogy of realities here, and there's a delta between me and the reality, and that to be effective, you've got to close that gap, at least be always in the process of trying to close it. Because if you're not, you're probably drifting away, actually, and that has pragmatic and practical implications around having distorted beliefs about the world that actually get in the way of being an effective entrepreneur.
Right.
I guess, is that true? Like, is
That is absolutely true. In fact, nothing changes though, Amen, unless you have the desire. Of
right?
course, a good organization like the enterprise universe is going to generate that desire in you by being an example or inspiring, and
Right.
all
And
of those things.
in that
Right.
case, I think you'd have to teach me how to think, in the sense of I need to be able to dispassionately look at reality, note the fact that there's a gap, and then look towards closing it. You know, there's that, and I think that becomes maybe the point, is that uh, have I the ability to recognize the gap and work on closing it? You know what I'm saying? Versus I live in delusion and I think there is no gap. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. As a matter of fact, Amen, once you recognize the gap,
Mhm.
bridging that gap is actually the easiest part.
Mm.
Recognition, and also, creating the desire first, and then say, I recognize I have this gap and I need to fill it.
I agree
Filling
there.
is really not that difficult from my
It,
personal experience.
right. And I think part of it is we often only see the symptoms of the gap, not the gap itself.
Exactly.
Because we see, it's suffering, I think, to a certain extent, is a symptom of a gap. Like, you're not, because, why am I suffering over this? Well, maybe it's because you're not, as you said, it's just feedback. You're taking it personally, like that's getting in the way of you being an effective manager or a leader, because you have to distinguish between the feedback and you know.
Oh,
And that simple
absolutely.
idea I'm just imagining, I'm just, because I'm learning as we're doing this ourselves here, and I'm just trying to tease around out for Eamon, what does this mean in this meaning, like know thyself? What are you really asking me to do?
Well, I'm telling you, in life, you may have hundreds of different things that you have to close the gap on. But when it comes to the enterprise universe, Eamon has five or six things that he may have to improve on. I'm telling you, every one of us, including myself, we all need to improve upon. There's nobody that's perfect.
Hmm.
You already reached it. No, no, it's really there's a gap, and we need to see all of it. In fact, in the leading environment, which is what the enterprise universe is going to embrace, it's going to say, Amen, when he receives negative criticism, he's not going to say, no, you can't say that about me. I'm not that. No, he's going to say, thank you for pointing that out because he knows that's a starting point to become a better person.
Right. And I can
And
see how this now then plays into the enterprise universe, because it becomes pivotal to our ability as a community to evolve, essentially. Because we're all working on forever know thyself, close the gap, accept feedback. It's a positive thing, it's a journey versus, being stuck in this here's me, I'm a fixed point, and the universe is fixed, and there's some kind of a conflict going on. Because and I think that's really liberating, to be honest, to think of ourselves as less static, because I think we tend to be, and I think society and even people we love tend to look at us a little bit static, oh, you're not the person I used to know. Well, maybe that's a good thing, maybe
it is
maybe
actually
this
a good.
enterprise universe stuff is doing me good because I'm actually not the person I used to be,
And if you
so
are changing for the better, yeah, it's
yeah.
always good to be different and better. But I tell you, when you start receiving negative criticism, of course, there should be some rules of the game. Of course, somebody cannot pick on you because they don't like you personally and they're trying to give you grief. That's really not what the negative criticism is
The
about.
point isn't to beat on people. It's compassion in a sense to help them close their gaps, and I do equate it in my personal life to suffering. I know that's like I've been in the source of a lot of my own. So like no, I'm not questioning the fact that there isn't suffering in the world, but I've been a fair source of my own suffering there, James, over the years. Do you know?
You know,
More than a fair.
that I have done that too. I didn't just become like this. It's
Yeah.
it's taken a lot of time to understand and put my mind to and try to become better. And I always think of myself as I'm a better person today than I was yesterday,
Yeah, which
and
is
I
a
will
very
be a better
positive
person
thing.
tomorrow than today. That's really what I want to do. But in this environment, Eamon, as you start moving toward that objective reality, whatever that might be,
Mhm.
you are going to long for negative criticism, not run away from it. You're always looking for somebody to tell you because you know that that's going to make you better.
Right.
And of course, you're going to impart your knowledge and your experience and wisdom to others that are just coming on to the enterprise universe and trying to get themselves better. So it's really kind of like a learning environment. It's always constantly learning and sharing and not to
And
lose the fact.
challenging because there is an aspect of I'm always trying to push myself to expand my abilities. I see that at least in what you're, because if I think about the recipes discussion you had, like I've got my capabilities around innovation, I've got my capabilities around finance, I've got my capabilities around business, and then some of this could lead back to the gap, and then basically knowing thyself, where I've strengths, where I've weaknesses, and then basically working on that, not in a kind of oh you suck kind of sense, but more in a kind of a constructive humanistic evolutionary kind of sense, I guess, in terms of becoming a better person.
There will be a
Positive thing. Positive thing.
value set, Eamon, for the enterprise universe. There might be 10 things that we all agree that we all have to improve on. Only 10 things, let's say. Those 10 things have some rules. When somebody criticizes you on this, And there is a group that would say, is that really realistic, and so forth. So it's not like somebody's picking on you because they're mean about it. No, that's not what it is. We're going to try to create the rule set in such a way that everybody's going to respect those rules and try to make each other better. But we're not going to tackle everything under the sun too. So I don't want anyone to walk away from
Right,
it
which
saying,
is why you were pushing back on kind of the psychotherapy type of thing.
no,
It's
no,
not about
we're not.
psychotherapy. It's about practical things that we have to work on in order to further the mission for our purpose.
Exactly.
And I can see that. I think that's
It,
pretty central actually.
it is central, and Eamon, look at this. If you have a recipe, you look at any random business now and you just put them in those three buckets, it happens to be, say, 40, 40, 20. You ask yourself then, is that a successful recipe?
Mm.
So the answer might be yes for them, because their purpose might be screwed up. We don't know that. But if you ask them, okay, have you refined your purpose by knowing yourself better? That answer might be different. In that case, you would have to go back and fine tune your purpose, which would ultimately change your recipe too,
Right.
which actually
Yes.
changes your success
Right.
definition.
There's a feedback loop there amongst all of these things. So while they're stepping stones and they're independent, there's a relationship because you're stepping from one step back and going to create. Yeah,
Well,
that makes
absolutely, because to achieve the common purpose of crossing that creek.
sense.
So
Yes.
that's the idea of without getting wet. So,
Yes.
so
Right.
it's nothing like, I'm talking about practical points here. They're not just talking about, okay, philosophical. Philosophy obviously drives it, a lot of it, but you
Hmm.
still have to have practical implications for your actions. So you're achieving results as an entrepreneur. We're talking about entrepreneur here because here is what I believe in, Eamon. There is a reason why I chose the private sector and to
Hmm.
become an entrepreneur, because that's where we could make the most impact.
Hmm.
Simply because in the academic world or in the government sector, which I have pretty good experience in, but there's some things that the private sector does that the other two sectors won't. Private sector is the only one that produces or creates productivity.
Right.
The other sectors are not. They are consumers of productivity, not
They're there to
necessarily
serve
creators.
the society. They're not there to. Yes, I understand, and I think people could argue that government can take the role, but at least in the society we live in, I think the concept is that it's there to provide services that enable, rather than services that are kind of their core economic services, at least to some extent. Uh, so I think that we're coming up on our time, Dr. Stalker. Anything? Where does this leave us now in terms of? I think we've by no means gotten to the bottom of know thyself, but I think we've gotten a little bit more clarity around what's meant by it. Um, where do we go from here? What's the next step that we need to be looking to take?
Well, Eamon, I actually use the golf game analogy here. The front five holes, it's a
All right.
nine-hole
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
So we just finished first
Yeah.
five: purpose, vision, pathways, recipe, and know thyself. Although we will touch on know thyself, periodically, because it's a deeper, meaningful block. And then I have the back four,
Okay.
where it's about dealing with customers, dealing with people, and making your organization a learning organization. And then how you deal with competitors.
Mm.
I think I want to open everyone's eyes about why they have this attitude about,
We need
you
to
know,
love our customers and love our competitors too.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. We eat your lunch, or all the cliches that we hear. That's all nonsensical. It's really because they're confused about the whole thing and the purpose and why
I like
they're in
that idea.
business. I'm
I
going
like
to
the
make
idea
everyone
of
cooperate more
yeah.
so than compete. So
Yes.
that's what's coming down the pike when we
Super.
more.
Super. And another thrilling conversation, Dr. Stalker. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll have another exciting episode here very soon. Thanks so much. God bless.